She walked into that hangar like she owned it. Because she did. The clock read 1:40 p.m. For those who don't speak military, when Brigadier General Evelyn Hart stepped into Hangar 6 at Laughlin Air Force Base, Texas, outside, the afternoon sun hammered down on the tarmac hard, enough to make the air shimmer and dance. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and the air carried that distinct military cologne. Jet fuel, gun oil, and ambition. The T-6 Texan II sat dead center under the overhead lights, looking every bit the thoroughbred it was designed to be. Brilliant white paint job with electric blue trim, twin blade propeller gleaming, steel canopy sealed tight. To the untrained eye, just another trainer aircraft. To her, it was a time machine. She moved toward it with the kind of quiet that makes you look twice, once because you barely heard her, twice because something about her didn't quite add up. No flight suit, no uniform, just plain grey slacks, a simple blouse under a light jacket, and a visitor badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. She stopped 3 feet from the wing and just looked. Her eyes traced every rivet, every axis panel, every scratch that told a story maintenance logs would never capture. Then she leaned in, examining the underside of the canopy, her gaze following the emergency egress handle with the kind of attention most people reserve for love letters or bomb defusal. "Ma'am, step away from the aircraft." The voice cut through the hangar like a whip crack. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just kept studying that tension rod housing along the top frame. "You can't be in here." Boots on concrete. Getting closer. Technical Sergeant Michael Barnes, late 30s, confident in that way. NCOs get when they've been doing the job long enough to forget what it's like not to know everything. Clipboard in one hand, authority in his voice, zero patience in his expression. He stopped 5 feet away, looking at her the way you'd look at a wrench that somehow ended up in the wrong toolbox. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave. Now." She finally turned her head, met his eyes. Her voice came out soft, almost curious. "Do you know what this switch does?" Barnes frowned. The question threw him off just enough to annoy him. "That's not." She gestured toward the cockpit again. "Just curious." His irritation bubbled up fast. He stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder, not rough, but definitely not gentle, and nudged her back a step. "That's enough. You don't belong near this equipment. I don't know how you got in here, but you're about 5 seconds from being escorted out by security forces." Across the hangar, 2 young airmen paused by the tool rack. One tried not to smirk. The other leaned in close, whispered something behind a gloved hand. Both watched the show. The woman didn't argue, didn't pull away. She just glanced down at the concrete floor for a beat, then looked back up at the sergeant. Said absolutely nothing. Barnes took a breath, squared his shoulders, and dropped into that NCO voice they teach in leadership school: forceful, clear, practiced authority wrapped in military courtesy. "This aircraft is an active trainer. No civilian should be touching it. You're in a military environment, ma'am, and there are protocols." She nodded once, slowly. The silence stretched. Barnes shifted his weight. His eyes dropped to her visitor badge, squinting at the text, but not actually reading it. Still didn't connect the dots. He stepped back, one hand resting on his hip near the radio clip to his belt. "You need to wait outside." She turned without a word and walked toward the exit. As she passed the 2 airmen, one muttered something under his breath. The other chuckled. She didn't react. Barnes exhaled, shook his head, and walked back toward the workbench, muttering something about civilians and chain of command. Behind him, the Texan II sat quiet under the lights, a sleek bird built for the future. But that hangar had just witnessed a moment pulled straight from the past, a moment soaked in assumption and missed details. No alarms, no confrontation, just a woman with sharp eyes and a question nobody bothered to answer. The woman moved down the corridor with measured steps, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead mixing with distant voices. It was 1:10 p.m. when she passed through a set of glass doors into the flight training room. Rows of young officers and cadets hunched over flight plans, checklists, and simulator schedules. The room buzzed with the controlled chaos of a weekday training cycle, focused energy, with just enough slack in the reins to let personality show through. She didn't announce herself, didn't pause at the door, just scanned the room once, found an empty chair along the back wall, and sat down. Not a single person recognized her. Her plain clothes, unremarkable and civilian, blended her into the background like camouflage. The visitor badge still hung neatly at her chest, but nobody looked closely enough to read it. Second Lieutenant Sagano, young, clean-cut, eager, broke away from his group and approached. His voice was courteous, the kind of polite but firm tone they drill into you early. "Ma'am, this area is for squadron personnel only. Are you here for maintenance or? She looked up. Her voice stayed soft, steady. I have an appointment with the base commander. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a simple answer that left the lieutenant nodding awkwardly before backing away. The noise in the room shifted, not louder, but sharper. Heads turned. Glances exchanged. Conversations resumed with an edge. Someone near the front leaned close to a classmate. She's probably lost. Or some contractor. Another voice, not unkind, but dripping with assumption, maybe janitorial. Looks like she took a wrong turn near logistics. The woman didn't react. She sat perfectly straight, hands resting lightly on her knees. Her eyes swept the room, slowly taking in the corkboard, pinned with approach charts and fuel planning graphs, studying the emergency landing flow for the T-6 Texan II, examining a sequence map for visual landings at alternate airfields. Nobody noticed her interest. Nobody asked why she looked more like she was evaluating than observing. She could have been a contractor. She could have been someone's aunt. That's all they saw. The room pulsed with energy. Laughter in one corner. A heated debate over alternate airfields in another. The buzz of a printer spitting out briefing packets near the instructor's desk. Yet she sat perfectly still, her presence carving out a quiet space of discomfort nobody could name. Every so often, a cadet would glance back, not to speak, just to check. She didn't fidget, didn't pull out a phone, didn't seem out of place in the way they expected. But somehow, she didn't belong. And that friction settled in the air like static before a storm. She checked her watch. Not rushed, not impatient, just acknowledging the time. 1523. 3:23 in the afternoon. Still, nobody asked who she was. She leaned forward slightly, as if studying the whiteboard at the front of the room. Written in dry erase marker was a practice question from a recent simulator scenario. What would be your immediate action following engine failure at pattern altitude? Her gaze lingered on the answer beneath it. Memory stirred. Her expression remained unreadable. Someone muttered near the front. This one's easy. Still, nobody addressed her directly. She waited, and the room, unaware, kept moving around her, never knowing they were being watched. At 1545, the door to the squadron commander's office opened with a soft click. The noise didn't stop right away, but it shifted. A few conversations dropped in volume. Heads turned. Colonel Grant stepped into the flight room, still holding a folder, glasses pushed up on his nose. His walk was brisk, practiced, comfortable in the authority it carried. But that changed the moment he saw her. He stopped mid-step, just looked. Then his spine straightened. His hand rose in a sharp salute. His voice rang out, crisp and formal. Ma'am, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow morning. The room froze. You could almost hear the breath catch in half a dozen throats. Chairs didn't creak. Pens didn't move. Somewhere near the back, a cup of coffee stopped halfway to someone's mouth. Colonel Grant turned to face the rest of the room. His words were deliberate, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce your new wing commander, Brigadier General Evelyn Hart. Dead silence. One by one, heads turned toward the woman, who just minutes ago had been mistaken for a contractor, a janitor, a nobody. She stood slowly, her posture effortless, natural, but commanding in a way that made the air feel tighter. At the far end of the room, Technical Sergeant Barnes took a single step back. Color drained from his face. His hands hovered near his sides, unsure what to do. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. She walked toward him without hurry. The click of her shoes against the tile echoed louder than the Colonel's announcement. Every eye was on her. She stopped a few feet from Barnes. He didn't move. Earlier today, you shoved your commanding officer. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried like thunder through the stillness. I asked you a question. You dismissed me. Then you put your hands on me and told me I didn't belong. Her face was calm, not angry, not smug. Just still, steady, focused. Around them, officers shifted in their seats. One cadet dropped his gaze to the floor. The room had become a lesson. Barnes opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Ma'am, I didn't know. I didn't see. She nodded once. That's the point, Sergeant. You didn't see because you weren't looking. Her tone never changed. It wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was just truth, laid bare. Respect isn't about recognizing a star on a collar. It's about how you treat people when you think they don't matter. Nobody breathed. Barnes swallowed hard. His voice came out low, almost cracking. I apologize, ma'am. She gave the smallest nod. You'll do better. We all will. Then she turned, walked back to the front of the room, and stood beside Colonel Grant. He hadn't said a word since announcing her name. Now he looked at her with quiet admiration. She glanced once more across the room, her expression unreadable. "Carry on, Colonel." He gave a short nod, then began briefing the squadron. His voice was clear but softer than usual, as if adjusting to a new gravity in the room. As she stepped out, the silence finally cracked, not with words, not with noise, just a shared understanding that something had shifted, something important, and nobody who had been there would forget it. It was just past 171:05, 10 p.m. when Colonel Grant stepped into her office. The hallway outside had quieted, most of the day's operations winding down. Inside, Brigadier General Evelyn Hart sat behind a plain desk, the overhead light casting a soft glow across a stack of folders she hadn't touched. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time that day, the corners of her mouth curved into something close to a smile. He closed the door gently behind him and stood for a second, almost awkward, like he wasn't sure if he was visiting a superior or an old friend. She gestured toward the chair across from her. He took it. He studied her face, still calm, still unreadable, then asked it straight. "No ceremony. Why today? Why unannounced? And why the plain clothes?" She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because I needed to see who people really were. Not when they were being watched, but when they thought they weren't." He nodded slowly. "Didn't interrupt." "This place shaped me," she said, her eyes drifting toward the window, though the blinds were shut. "I was 23 when I got my wings right here. I was one of 4 women in a sea of uniforms who didn't know what to do with us. Every mistake I made proved their point. Every success was luck." He leaned back slightly, listening. "One afternoon," she continued, "we were flying low over Helmand. Ground troops had been ambushed. Visibility was rough. Radio chatter a mess. They needed air cover or they were going to be overrun." She paused, then looked directly at him. "I dropped into the canyon without waiting for approval. It was too tight, too close, and I knew it. But I had eyes on their position, and I knew they didn't have another 5 minutes to wait. We ran 2 strafing passes, one clean, one hot, cleared the ridge. They lived. I almost didn't." Grant's eyebrows raised slightly. A-10s weren't built to be graceful, but she made it back in one piece. "That flight ended up in a citation. But you know what stuck with me?" She said it softly. "It wasn't a mission. It was when I got back and someone said, 'You were lucky.' Nobody said I led." The room fell quiet for a long moment. He exhaled. "You could have shown up in dress blues, walked in with 4 aides and a trumpet fanfare. Instead, you sat in the back and got shoved like a trespasser." She gave a slight shrug. "Ranks too easy. Real leadership, that takes patience. Listening, letting people reveal themselves." He shook his head with a kind of half laugh. "It's rare, Evelyn, that kind of thinking. Most people earn a star and forget what it's like to walk alone." She met his eyes again. "I never forgot, and I don't plan to start now." He sat a little straighter, something shifting in his expression. The respect had been there from the start. Now it settled deeper, more personal. "Welcome back, General," he said quietly. She smiled again. "Good to be back, Colonel." And with that, the conversation drifted into a silence that wasn't awkward, but earned. The kind that only came when 2 people understood something important had just passed between them, without fanfare, without force, just truth, simple and clear. The sun was just beginning to rise over Laughlin Air Force Base when Brigadier General Evelyn Hart stepped back onto the flight line. It was 07187, 18 in the morning. The air still carried a trace of the night's chill, though it would warm fast as the day picked up. The ramp buzzed with quiet activity. A flight crew prepped the first D6 tech center for takeoff, checklists in hand, voices low and focused. Young officers moved with purpose, uniforms sharper, postures straighter, salutes crisper. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. She wasn't just a visitor now. She was their commander. She took her time walking toward the operations tent, letting her eyes sweep over the field. Aircraft shimmered faintly in the morning light. Fuel trucks rolled past. A supervisor pointed out checklist items to a trainee. Everyone was busy, but not rushed. Everything felt steadier. Near the edge of the apron, she saw him. Technical Sergeant Barnes stood alone, waiting, not fidgeting, but visibly holding himself at attention. He didn't glance around. His eyes were forward, the kind of posture someone takes when they've had time to reflect. As she approached, he stepped forward and saluted. She returned it calmly. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but steady. "No excuses. I was wrong." There was no defense in it. No rambling. No stammering. Just the truth. She let the silence hold for a breath, then nodded. "We all learn the hard way, Sergeant. What matters is whether we choose to stay blind or learn to see." He nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. She moved past him toward the flight operations area, gravel crunching under her boots. In the distance, the T-6's propeller spun up, engine whining as it taxied out. The student pilot followed every instruction cleanly. Run up, take off, checklist clearance. Moments later, the aircraft rolled forward, then lifted smoothly into the sky. She stopped at the edge of the runway and watched. The plane climbed at a clean angle, banking slowly, then turned back toward the airfield. It passed overhead once in a wide, graceful arc. Then it climbed again, rolling gently left, then right, before easing into a full barrel roll. Not showy, not flashy, just tight, clean, and controlled. A tribute. She smiled quietly to herself. The maneuver wasn't required. It wasn't briefed, but it was permitted, and well earned. Her gaze followed the aircraft as it leveled off and disappeared toward the training sector. She stood there a while longer, letting the silence return. Then, just before turning back, her voice slipped into the air, not loud, not rehearsed, just real. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. With character, with integrity, with how you treat the people nobody's watching. The breeze picked up slightly as she walked back toward the flight line. Her presence already felt even when she was gone from view. And on that runway, in that sky, and in every quiet moment that followed, something had changed, and they all knew it. If this story reminded you why respect, humility, and real leadership still matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Because the best leaders, they're the ones you never saw coming.